But for some God-given reason, we must trust in these institutions to be better people than we are to be.
Not for some God-given reason. It's because this is the reason that planes fly and trains are on time and buildings don't fall over and water comes to your house and the food that you eat isn't poisoned, because we have these institutions making sure that it's not poisoned. You just happen to not believe in the institutions that say things that you disagree with, and then you become a expert in these things. Oh man, that's a loaded question. That's so funny. If you tax me more, I'm not going to see that direct result. And it's really hard to quantify 1 or 2 or 3% improvements in your quality of life because you're paying more in taxes. It's really hard to draw those direct distinctions. Okay, I wanted to make a video about Trudeau stepping down and who might replace him. And I wanted to see what other people were saying in this space. And I started watching this video. It came up on my feed and it was just so filled with misinformation. I thought it was a better time just to kind of go over some of the nonsense that this guy talks about. I have some other videos lined up where I debunk this guy's absolute dog shit takes. But for now, I think we're going to just go through this and I'll show you kind of the way that it's easy to debunk people like this. Very, very easy.
Well, new year, new plan, clearly, for Justin Trudeau. Doing exactly what he said he wouldn't do just a number of weeks ago. Trudeau has stepped down. This isn't news to you.
No, I'm a fighter. Every bone in my body has always told me to fight because I care deeply about Canadians. I care deeply about this country, and I will always be motivated by what is in the best interest of Canadians. And the fact is, despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralyzed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history. That's why this morning I advised the Governor-General that we need a new session of Parliament. She has granted this request, and the House will now be prorogued until March 24th.
Was this prorogation actually to give time for a leadership race so that we could have a strong Liberal Party headed into the next election? Well, yeah, maybe. Maybe he says it wasn't. He says we're slowing it down because Parliament is at a standstill. No mention of why. But it seems that this prorogation is serving two purposes. One, allow that leader to be found. Two, let's just push this scandal to the side. And that's very, very similar to what we've seen in the past. Do you remember? Do you remember back in 2021? 2021 when the federal government, okay, there we go. We're going to pause this. Take a look here. This is from 2021. This is 4 years ago, well before now, or 3.5 years ago, I suppose. 2021, when the, or I believe it was late 2020, federal government prorogues Parliament, just like we're seeing today. And why did they do it? Well, largely to cover up a scandal by proroguing Parliament, largely the We charity scandal that you may have heard of back at the time. So this isn't unprecedented territory for the Liberal government. It is unprecedented territory for Trudeau, who's never been told he must step down by his entire party. That certainly hasn't happened. But the getting away with potential conflicts of interest and getting away with potential fraud as a result of proroguing Parliament, so that okay, all of these committees.
And let me start off here. I very much think that based off all the things that I said and just like the sentiment within the parties and everything like that, that Trudeau very much should step down or should have stepped down. He's horribly unliked. And if you want, I guess, more left-leaning or liberal policies to get implemented, then he has been nothing but a blemish on the party that's dragging them down. So him stepping down is probably the best possible scenario for more left-wing politics. Really depends if the NDP decide to call an election or not, but we'll just have to see from there. But if the NDP don't call an election and kind of help the Liberals hobble through, they're going to put themselves in probably the best position possible. I know that JJ McCullough was thinking that an election may get called in May. If that happens, then Liberals are pretty much screwed. But if they can extend it out to the normal date of, I think it's October, then I think they have much better chances of succeeding. And I guess the way that you would weigh that is like the NDP, the reason they would want to kind of maintain the Liberal power is, again, to hopefully have the economy turn around, hopefully have housing getting back on track, hopefully having things get a little bit better, because at the end of the day, it's already a supermajority for the Conservatives, so it can't really get worse. But right now, it's probably as bad as it could be, which would harm any left-wing policies that even the NDP would want. So that's kind of where I see it in a case where that could be strategic for them, but it also could kind of blow up in their face if it means that the kind of Liberals come out on top and then the NDP is blamed for kind of letting it go for so long. I'm not sure.
Hearings, all of these things, we're going to pause them and then we'll restart and probably won't talk about them again in the future. People's attention span will move on. That's happened before. That's happening again, even if he says, well, I'm doing it because the Conservatives have slowed down Parliament. Now, I want to get into another issue here because it relates directly to one of the biggest claims made by Trudeau in this speech that he just gave today, saying he would no longer be leader of the party. It comes down to the idea of Canadians trusting institutions. Canadians trusting institutions and having faith in these institutions. Now, many politicians will argue that Canadian faith in institutions is what helps our economy and our society run smoothly. If we all share a same trust of the same institutions, we can listen.
This is true. Trust in institutions is probably the single most important thing to cohesiveness of a society. The second, or not the second, but like once we have a large portion of our population not trusting in institutions, not trusting in science, that being climate change, not trusting in kind of economics or or the economy or anything like that, and kind of trusting their own personal intuition of what must be right and wrong, and this rejection of experts is how we get measles outbreaks, how we get climate change deniers, how we get issues around a whole bunch of non-experts making decisions that should be made by experts, right? The same way that you don't want a bridge built by someone who's not an engineer, who doesn't have experience, who doesn't know all of these things. You don't want to have these mechanisms ruled over and controlled by people who really have no idea how they work, and that's where they break down. One thing that Russell is for is a decentralization of our banking system and not having bureaucrats run it, and having it, I believe, under the control of whatever government is in power, which is pretty much one of the worst decisions you could ever make. It's a quick way that you can ruin your entire economy, ruin your entire country with just a single bad election. Again, imagine if Trump was 100% in charge of the Federal Reserve, or if you're left wing, imagine if, Polia or the PPC was fully in charge of our monetary policy, or the other way around, if you're conservative and the NDP was fully in charge of our monetary policy and implemented like modern monetary theory and things like that, right? You do not want your federal government, who is incentivized by short-term gains, to be directly in control of your banking institutions. That is really, really bad. And I can't stress that enough, because you could just infinitely print money depending on the concentration of power for that. Whereas our Federal Reserve or the Bank of Canada, their goal is to control unemployment and inflation, and they do quite a good job of that, all things considered. And it's really important, again, to have strong trust in these institutions. I wonder what he's going to say about this, because I know he's an anti-institution guy.
Listen to them, and we can know that what they're saying is true and that they are looking out for our best interests, and we can be more cohesive as a country. We can be more lock in step. We can hold the hands of our neighbors because we all share the same reality. And that may be true, that maybe there'd be more social cohesion. But we're getting to a place in Canada where a lot of people, unfortunately, do not trust the institutions that they are beholden to. Where has that distrust come from? Is the question we're going to.
I'm wondering, what is the Canadian trust in institutions? Yeah, it's like confidence in the media, confidence in stuff. Let's see. Probably you can check that one as well. So yeah, so trust in police is okay. Trust in our courts and justice system is a little bit lower. School system, federal parliament, and then media. And these are all relatively low. Yeah. So police at the highest for these types of institutions. I wonder if it has others. Yeah, then it just breaks it up by provinces. I think there's a few others. Because there'll be ones like trust in your scientific institutions, your university institutions, things like that. And what I've seen, at least generally speaking, is there's a kind of low trust in institutions as of late. And part of that is social media and people being fed bullshit, right? Like, think about how many anti-vax and people who are now against healthcare institutions and how much damage and harm that can cause. Not trusting in our news institutions and media, that's led to people following people like Joe Rogan, or insert whoever agrees with whatever position they have, rather than back in the day when you could generally be like, okay, conservatives are going to watch Fox News and liberals are going to watch MSNBC or CNN or whatever it is in the States. And then in Canada, we have like CBC and the National Post and things like that. And now that we have this fracturing of institutions and this low trust in it, now people are like, well, no, I don't need experts. I trust in my own personal ability to determine what is right or wrong or what is true or not. And that's generally fucking terrible, because most people are ignorant to most things, including myself. That's why I trust in experts and expert institutions to derive and argue what are the answers to these complicated and complex questions. My uninformed opinion is completely irrelevant. And yeah, I wish people would have a little bit more humility with understanding where their knowledge base lies. I don't come to the conclusion of like carbon taxes are good because I fucking feel like it. I look at what do the smartest people in the realm of economics say, and then say, well, they've done the work for that. And I can read the papers, I can do all that, but I'm still going to be bound by my own biases and my own ineptitudes or inabilities to understand certain things. Again, it takes a lot of hubris to be like, no. Those people who spent their entire lives learning about these topics, learning about these subjects, doing these things, they're fucking wrong. Me, random guy who, works as a welder or an engineer or whatever it is, knows about the world and knows about all of these topics that other people have dedicated their lives to. Like, fuck off.
We're going to talk right now. We're going to talk about why they've lost this trust, but also why a lot of Canadians are getting so cynical about some of the biggest issues of the day. Many people believe that the environment is a very big issue in Canada. Many people believe that Indigenous reparations and reconciliation, that this stuff is important. And I'm not going to make the argument one way or the other. You can think what you want about that.
Oh God, I hate this fucking. Oh, he's such a centrist. He's such a fucking spineless centrist. I'm not gonna. He said this in other videos that I've watched of him, so I'm getting a little bit triggered from those in case I'm going in a little hard. But like I hate centrists so much. This like wishy-washy, like, how could we ever know? How could we ever blah, blah, blah? Like, no, fuck off, right? There, again, this is where like trust in institutions, trust in experts and things like that is really important, right? There's like, there are right answers and there are wrong answers. And the way that we find right or wrong is through scientific method, through institutions, through intellectual diversity, trying to figure out and solve these problems. And things like that. But just like actually sit down and take a fucking position, dude. Jesus Christ.
But even for the people who are pushing this idea as this being the most important thing we need to think about, well, they're doing their own cause a vast disservice, because in my opinion, these causes have been used by politicians and by corporations to make more money instead of actually serving the resolution of these issues. Let's get into this, because this is the next clip from the Trudeau press conference that we saw today, and I think you're going to find it pretty interesting. Let's listen in.
Pierre Poilievre, the next campaign.
Pierre Poilievre's vision for this country is not the right one for Canadians. Stopping the fight against climate change doesn't make sense. Backing off on the values and strength in diversity that Canada has always worked to pull itself together on is not the right path for the country. Attacking journalists, the CBC institutions, that's not what Canadians need in this moment. We need an ambitious, optimistic view of the future, and Pierre Poilievre is not offering that. And I look forward to the fight as progressives across this country stand up for the kind of vision for a better country that Canadians have always carried, despite the tremendous pressures around the world to think smaller, to veer towards the hard right, and to be less ambitious for what we can be and do as a country when the world really needs Canada.
This is...
So just, yeah, like I think he's going to, I think he mentioned at the beginning, or at least the little bit that I did watch before this, but basically I had jumped around. I jumped to like minute 20 is where I was like, okay, fuck, I need to make a video about this. So I haven't seen any of these parts, but yeah, the like axe to tax is clearly an anti-climate change statement. Oh fuck, what else did he say? 1 sec.
We need an ambitious, optimistic view of the future. Vision for this country is not the right one for Canadians. Stopping the fight against climate change doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so
backing off on the values and strength in diversity that Canada has always worked to pull itself together on.
That was a nothing statement, whatever.
It's not the right path for the country. Attacking journalists, the CBC institutions, that's not what Canadians...
Yeah, so yeah, it was the institutions. So CBC as an institution, that's like, he wants to defund it. It's something like Canada spends $1 billion a year on CBC, and he's like, I'm gonna make money back out of our like $500 billion budget. So percents of a percent, that's an argument of whether we should have government funded journalist systems. I generally support them as a concept. I think it's good to have this kind of journalism for the sake of journalism, right? So you're not chasing clicks, you're not chasing these things. You can have some level of integrity towards looking for stories and doing things like that. People on the other side tend to say, well, they're biased towards the liberals, which I find to be a bit of a weird argument because it's funded by the liberal governments or the conservative governments. CBC would be doing itself a disservice if it only gave favorable coverage to the liberals, which then would lead them to getting defunded. So I think the CBC is a really good news organization. I think most news organizations, including Fox News, including National Post, not including Rebel News because they're not a real news organization, but real news organizations like those generally get the facts right. They generally get the same facts. They can spin it a little bit in a different way or highlight certain things, but for the most part, those news organizations actually do quite a good job. And if we're not going to fund CBC, there could be a different system where you try to fund, more left-leaning or more right-leaning ones. Like if the National Post was propped up to the same level as the CBC and the funding was split either way, I would support that as well as maybe a compromise between the systems. But yeah, I think it's bad that Poilievre is trying to get rid of the CBC.
Need in this moment. We need an ambitious, optimistic view of the future, and Pierre Poilievre is not offering that. And I look forward to the fight as progressives across this country stand up for the kind of vision for a better country that Canadians have always carried, despite the tremendous pressures around the world to think smaller, to veer towards the hard right, and to be less ambitious for what we can be and do as a country when the world really needs Canada.
This is so incredibly frustrating, I'm sure, for a lot of you to hear, especially people who agree with a lot of these values that Trudeau is espousing. These values that we need to be focused on the environment and making Canada a clean and safe place to be. Saying, okay, we recognize the strength that diversity can bring us. These kinds of ideas that Trudeau has regularly pushed. Ideas which, in my opinion, aren't entirely wrong. But you cannot blame Canadians. You cannot blame us for starting to question these ideals. At the very least, starting to question that if we elect our government to go and try to improve these areas of concern, will they do it? Or is this just a way to make us angry, make us upset, and make us believe that you're going to do something when really every good crisis, or what's the saying? What is the saying? It is never let a good crisis go to waste. These possibly very real problems are being used by corporations and being used by governments to funnel money into their preferred pockets. This is what happened with the Sustainable Development Fund. Companies that were given money were never checked in on to see, okay, what progress have you made here? What claims have you made here? How many emissions have you actually reduced?
So the issue here is in part just with government bureaucracy, right? One of the value of kind of private industry and things like that is you have checks and balances. Like you can fail, and the fact that you can fail makes you try to succeed. Government doesn't have that. You can have an institution that, or you can have these, I guess, it's not concepts, but it's like these committees of people. Maybe you have a committee on like stopping smoking, for instance, right? And you start this committee to stop smoking in Canada, and you throw money at it because you're like, oh yeah, this is a great idea. And then for 30 years, it kind of gets brushed under the rug and you forget about it, and then you don't do any audits on it for how good it is or anything to that nature because it doesn't matter. There's no oversight. There's no failure opportunity. So a lot of the claims and the issues that people have with these institutions are that we're not applying our checks and balances properly to see where issues lie. And I don't fault people for being mad at those types of systems, or when money is wasted on green technology that doesn't go anywhere or that don't have good ROIs. Like, this is why I'd like to see a lot more economists and optimization engineers being hired by these government institutions to make sure things run efficiently and make sure the money is going to the correct places and make sure all of these things. And I'm not unsympathetic to the idea that some people are losing faith in these institutions. I just think that it's really, really bad that we are, and we need to work to address that. But I also don't know if it's entirely at the fault of these governments either. And part of that is this is our ability to silo ourselves and just read whatever fits our narrative and then have an algorithm push whatever fits our narrative to us. And that's unfortunate because we're not getting expert opinions, we're getting whatever feeds us. And I may do this with a few other right-wing YouTubers, but they literally just, read off fucking Twitter, whatever random anti-institution person is pushing or saying.
These aren't the questions that we're asked, and people are starting to not trust the government because they're saying, hey, even if you say that you believe in these ideals, even if I agree with the way that you talk about them, I simply don't trust you to implement them, to implement these policies. How come if we're spending billions of dollars on sustainable development and agreeing, fitting ourselves for a green economy, how come we've seen our emissions go up and up and up, even relative to other countries? If we're spending more than we've ever spent on housing, how come we're not seeing more affordable housing for people? It's a lack of trust of people to actually execute on the things that they're talking about, and more and more people believing that, hey, they were never going to execute on it. This was never going to be something that was going to happen. Never.
So the issue with housing is that it's really hard for the federal government to actually do very much. And this is like a frustrating piece about this discussion, is that most of housing is predicated on zoning laws that are municipal. And then above that, kind of what you're allowed to build, or if the provincial government steps in, but it's mostly municipal and provincial governments. Federal governments have some say, and we kind of got out of non-market housing and things like that, and to help kind of the bottom 10% of people. But to blame the federal government for housing, I think, is a huge misstep when it's almost entirely predicated on zoning laws.
Let a good crisis to go to waste, and that's what we're seeing here. Now, he talks about Polyev saying, we can't turn our back on the fight on climate change. Now, some people may believe that this isn't a big issue, climate change in the environment. I'm not here to convince you one way or the other, but let's.
Like I said, he's so fucking wishy-washy. Like, this is the kind of, like, I'm not going to take a stance because I know some people in my audience are like brain dead rightoid morons who will just lose their mind if you say climate change is real. But if you take this pussyfooting, like, walk both sides kind of political speak, especially like you see this more on conservative side of like not taking a stance on a certain subject like abortion or something like that, where they may be real cagey about it. It pisses me off. It's like, no, I really don't care what your opinion on climate change is, Russell. Climate change is real and human caused. Like, just fuck.
Take the perspective of somebody who's deeply concerned about the environment and is deeply concerned about carbon emissions and how much CO2 we're releasing into the environment. Let's take that perspective. Even if you are the most extreme environmentalist in the world, even if you're Greta Thunberg, the way that Canada has handled this whole file over the past decade has been entirely wrong, in my opinion. Right? We could be reducing global emissions so much more than we are right now with the way that we're doing things. We could be reducing global emissions. We have a lot of energy in Canada, a lot of access to energy, and a lot of that energy industry has not been developed. And I think that's largely served American companies, the fact that Canada.
Okay. Yeah, this is where I started freaking out. So I have this prepped. So I made a comment. Is this, yeah, he talks about total emissions. Let me just do, oh, what the fuck? Okay, well, whatever. I guess that link doesn't work, but Canada emissions per year. Right, so if we just go to our world and data and we scroll down here, we can take a look, and total emissions are down. So from 2008, it was 17.2. Now it's 14. This is tons per capita. Obviously 2020 had a pretty big drop, and then it climbed, and now it's fallen back down a little bit. But when the carbon tax was first implemented, it was at 15.4, and if you look at when he was elected, it was at 15.7. So that's around a 9 to like 13% drop in per capita emissions, which is great. And then if we go down here and look at our total emissions, again, if we kind of get close to where he was elected, so is 565. This is CO2 emissions, not GHG emissions. So in my last video, I said 700 million. It's because it includes GHGs, but you can see it's down kind of a marginal amount. So as Canada's population has increased and all of these things, we've been able to become more efficient with our carbon use, but not necessarily reduce our total carbon emissions. You kind of have to take one as you can in that if we don't favor economic development, then people aren't going to be willing to make sacrifices or do things to get to environmentally sustainable goals. So although we'd like to see total emissions come down, we have seen per capita emissions gone down, which means we are making progress, but we definitely could be making a little bit more. But you kind of have to take what you can get. Again, in a case where, say, we lost a bunch of economic prosperity, then these emissions may be even higher. So that would be the counterfactual that we would have to look at. And I believe the studies done on it, looking at the emissions, show that emissions would have grown had we not implemented a carbon tax. And again, we implemented it in 2019 when it was at 582, and now we're down to 550. So still a lot of work to be done, but I wouldn't say that we're not reducing it, because we clearly are. Yeah, so this shows you our year-over-year change. Yeah, so it's like generally downward, but definitely we could do a little bit more. So, and then there's obviously the big recessions.
Doesn't have the capacity to produce as much energy as we possibly could. And people, environmentalists, some will say, well, we can't be developing our energy industry. It will hurt the environment too much. But that is a very narrow way of looking at things. Because,
well, okay, this is the other thing, is if you look at natural, can I spell? Natural gas production Canada per year, you will see that we've actually produced more natural gas than I think we ever have in history. Yeah, or at least since 1998, which I doubt we would have had more gas production anytime before that. So 190 billion cubic meters of natural gas. So I don't know where these memes come from, where people are like, oh, we're killing our oil and gas industry. We're not doing all these things. We're blah, blah, blah. Like, what do you want from me? The federal government bought a pipeline to try to save it, and we've increased natural gas production since he was in office. In fact, if you look at the years where Harper was in office, we had lower gas production. It went, you can see it went up when Trudeau came into office, and up and up and up until 2018, and then it came down a little bit, and it's bounced right back up. Like, I don't know where this idea comes from, where we're just like fucking up our energy resources.
people need energy in the world to survive, and they're going to get that energy from somewhere. Now, will they get it from us, where we can regulate it, where we can make sure our oil and gas industry...
Yeah, fuck me. This is the argument of like, well, they're going to get it from somewhere. And then I just like show them this chart of like, what the fuck are you talking about? They are getting, we're giving it to them. Like, we've literally ramped up production. Like, I don't know, we could ramp it up more, maybe. I don't know. But like, to say that we haven't is absolutely ridiculous.
Is doing things as clean as they possibly can, or at least do it to an extent that we deem acceptable as Canadians, and that we can benefit from economically. Would we rather have Germany get their energy from us in that way, maybe liquefied natural gas, or would we want them to turn to other areas that perhaps aren't as concerned about the environment? Perhaps we'll process energy in dirtier ways, right? When we act so performatively in Canada, like we have to be the example for the world in the way that we do this. We've got to be the one who shows everybody how they should be acting. And if we all make ourselves martyrs for this cause, and we all act in this selfless way, if we all give up the economic upside of this, well, we will make the world a better place. When in reality, what you're doing is saying, no, I'm not going to have a strong economy that could benefit from the growth of this sector, but I'm also going to make the world more polluted and more and less clean, because I'm shooing away possible customers for that energy and having them get it from places, maybe Persian Gulf states, maybe from China, these places that maybe don't have environmental interests at the top of their list when it comes to producing their energy. But you can't look...
Again, just like, look at the data. You're speaking out of your ass. You're speaking on how you feel about some topic, not what's actually true. We're producing lots of natural gas. It's kind of hard to get it overseas. Kind of hard to do that. It's really hard to compete with OPEC because their cost per barrel is way lower than ours. So they can produce oil at a cheaper rate than we can here in Canada. The reason the tar sands took kind of so long for us to exploit is because you needed gas and oil to be expensive enough that it was worth obtaining. This is what I've talked about so many times on this channel, is the different of what reserves mean. Reserves are relative to the economic value of material, right? So I can pick up a rock in any part of Canada and it might have 0.00001% copper in it. So technically it has copper, and we could get that copper out. Can we get it out economically? No, not even a little bit. And so this is where a bit of a disconnect comes in, is yeah, we still have to compete on these economic platforms, and Canadian gas isn't the cheapest way to get it at the end of the day.
At the other side of things when it comes to these people, right? If you say anything that is against the narrative of the environment, well, then your alternative solution, well, it just isn't ours. So you must be ending the fight against climate change, which I just think is.
And again, this is just him strawmanning the position. Like, China is building more solar and wind than any country in the world. They're exporting these solar and wind panels all over, right? There's huge solar production in the States. And if we look to third world countries that say don't have any power, what do you think they're going to be more excited about? A solar panel, which they may only have to buy once or could get gifted to them, whatever it may be. So now at least they have some amount of power, or really volatile oil and gas production that they may or may not be able to get. And now they are reliant on this constantly consumable source. Again, I talked about this in other videos. It's once you install these types of systems, they're there, they create power, right? Versus being reliant on whatever the market demands and however the market changes for your fuel source.
Simply not true. He talks about institutions and trust. Why should we trust these institutions? What is that trust in institutions actually doing? Who is it actually serving? More and more so, I'm starting to believe it's not you and me, the average Canadian. I'm starting to believe corporations, political, wealthy, well-connected elite. This is who a faith in these centralized institutions really serves.
Yeah, again, this just gets into the conspiracy of like, institutions bad because I don't understand them and therefore they're bad. Essentially, right? It's like, it serves the wealthy elite. And then when you look at stuff and you're like, well, what do policies actually help just the wealthy elite, or are they helping the average person? Like, we can, like, it's so frustrating. So yeah, we can look at like, how have like real wages grown in Canada, right? The recent data is going to be a little bit funky, but like, real wage growth Canada, right? Real wage growths are recovering, but if we just want to look at it over time, so is it this? Yeah, this one ends in 2015, but like, if you look at real wage growth, well, it's easier to look at this chart than, I just know this one off the top of my head. Unhinged National Post Housing. So this one's a little bit old, but you can look at the data here, and if you look at any position on it, you can see that real wages have been growing over time. This is cost of housing, home prices, again, mostly municipal zoning laws, so not the fault of the federal government, right? But these are real wages, and those have been increasing. So like, I get that people are frustrated about the cost of housing, the cost of living, and all of these things, but that's more fundamental to your municipal zoning laws. So if you don't like them, fucking get mad at your local government. Don't get mad at the federal government. Otherwise, these institutions have been making Canadians richer on average. This is real, adjusted for inflation, right? Real disposable income. So this is after-tax income has been increasing year over year.
And even if you believe that any central institution is entirely well-functioning, it's good for us to have that central institution. What you cannot deny is the ability for a centralized institution to be corrupted, a centralized institution to have other influences pushed on it. We saw this in Canada.
Okay, yes. Institutions can be corrupted. They can have issues with them. They can have all of these things. I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that we need to hold these institutions accountable. The issue is that when you get rid of these institutions, you have fucking nothing. You have, I feel like this is true. This is how I feel about any topic. This is every debate that I've had with a climate change denier, is like, well, I don't actually care. I've lived here for 40 years. I've done all these things. I'm right. Fuck you. Right? That's the issue when we stop trusting our institutions, is that we start trusting our intuitions over them, and our intuitions are fucking useless at determining what is true or what is not, right? Like, your intuition on immigration, I don't give a shit about. I care about what studies and economists are saying about immigration. I don't care what you personally believe, Ugh, it just pisses me off.
All the foreign interference, whether you're looking at Trudeau and the Chinese interference allegations, or whether you're looking at Polyev and the Indian interference allegations. We know that individuals and small groups of people can be heavily impacted by money.
And that's the value of institutions, though. It's large groups of people who can debate and argue out their positions and compete for the best ideas. Like I'm talking more about like scientific and scholarly institutions like Springer or journals or academia or anything like that, where you have this diverse group of people who battle out their ideas. And that's the value of institutions. Is any individual is super biased and is always going to have blind spots and have motivated reasoning for whatever they are. But the best way to deal with that and the best way to beat that is by having a whole bunch of people who are individually motivated reasoned. But if you look at it as like a organism or a whole system, then they're able to fight out their ideas. So the example would be like me and Carl both trust in institutions. We just had our own biases and then approached it differently, right? But we had the same basis of understanding of like, hey, this is the scientific literature. We agree this is scientific literature. We're not denying that any of this is like wrong or messed up or anything like that. And then we can apply our biases afterwards and have a discussion that way. The issue is that when you get rid of those institutions that can be your truth-seeking machines, then you just have, well, I feel like this is true because I believe it's true and because it aligns with my core beliefs. Wow, I can't believe that happened. Right? I'm going to be a big simp for big business and institutions here, but fuck me, dude.
By social pressure or maybe blackmail, right? We know that small groups of people can have their strings pulled. So when it comes to institutions, we look at central
right, and furthermore, like this is how you kind of like you edge your way into being like, see, the institutions are wrong. Like people like this, I don't know if he's doing it intentionally or not, but this is what Russia tries to do. Russia knows what they're saying is bullshit, and they even know that a lot of people in their country know that it's bullshit. But they don't care. What they're trying to show is that don't trust me, don't trust anybody else, don't trust anything, right? Right, and when you kind of sow these seeds of corruption or idea, people can apply that in any way. Like he's not putting forward any like, to what degree are these systems corrupt? To what degree, right? You always expect some level of corruption or some level of free rider problems in anything that you do, right? But if that can be minimized, if that can be reduced, how big of an impact are those things playing on these institutions is what's important, rather than, oh yeah, I already don't trust these institutions, and what this guy's saying is right. Yeah, there could be chances of corruption, so therefore they are corrupt, and therefore I don't have to trust these institutions, and therefore I trust my own intuition. And Joe Rogan said this, and I think I'm going to take fucking ivermectin now. Or we had the example of the kid in Alberta who fucking died because he had pneumonia, and his parents were giving him, or meningitis or something, and his parents were fucking giving him honey and water because they didn't trust our medical institutions. It's just, it's so frustrating because like our institutions have to be absolutely perfect. Anything they get wrong immediately discredits them, but you can discredit somebody like Donald Trump or Joe Rogan or random blogger who says things that you like 1,000,000 times over, and the trust in them doesn't seem to be tarnished. But you can point out where a paper got it wrong, a journal got it wrong, an institution got things wrong, and then you can use that as the fuel to say, well, now I don't trust any institutions. And it's just, it's unbelievably annoying when he makes arguments like this.
Banks, the Bank of Canada, in the States, the Federal Reserve, and the central institutions that they are a part of, the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund. These are the institutions that Trudeau is trying to talk about here, and how important it is that we trust in them. At the end of the day, these institutions are all people. They're all corruptible, just like I am, just like you are. But for some God-given reason, we must trust in these institutions to be better people than we are to be.
Not for some God-given reason. It's because this is the reason that fucking planes fly and trains are on time and buildings don't fall over and water comes to your house and the food that you eat isn't poisoned because we have these institutions making sure that it's not poisoned. You just happen to not believe in the institutions that say things that you disagree with, and then you become a fucking expert in these things. Oh, lose my fucking mind, dude.
Wiser to be the ones that are anointed into these positions to make our decisions for us, the plebs, the people who can't understand. Look at the central banks, right?
Yes, you don't understand. That's the thing. I don't want you, random guy, building fucking housing and stuff. You random guy who is shilling crypto, a goddamn scam, right? Protect your crypto, access decentralized finance, right? Like, really? Is this like the guy that we're trusting, right? I'm gonna get so fucking angry. But yes, the same way that like I'm gonna have a plumber come to my house soon to fix some things, because you know what, I'm not a goddamn plumber. I don't know how to do those things. I trust in the plumber's ability. I trust in our institutions that this plumber was trained correctly so they can come to my house. I'm not going to comb through every single thing and act like I can be an expert in everything. Right? This is what's so frustrating, is everybody in the world, everybody like him is willing to trust in all of these other institutions until it's something they don't like. And it's just so annoying.
On the channel. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel. You may not have heard this before. It doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't sign you up for anything. Hell, you'll not even see me if you don't want to. If you don't click on every single video, you kind of get it to the bottom. Subscribe, it only helps the channel. But if you have been here before, if you've been here for years, you'll know that I've been blowing this whistle, that central banks are making political decisions, whether they want us to think that or not. We saw one of the biggest things happen in Canada during the COVID pandemic.
Oh, he's about to do it.
Print money. Print tons of money, not with an actual physical money printer, but with something called quantitative easing, a central bank tool that allowed a lot of money to go into the big commercial banks here in Canada. Now, this money printing resulted in the highest level of inflation that we've seen in recent memory, consumer inflation, but even before that, asset price inflation. We saw the rise of value of stocks, the rise of value of real estate, as well as other hard assets. We saw crypto go up, we saw gold and silver go up, assets that usually wealthy people hold, while everybody else, maybe people barely making ends meet, they either have no cash savings at all and are just scraping by month to month, or maybe they've done the good thing and gotten an emergency fund.
Holy fuck. Okay, yeah, this is what I was talking about, where he's like, how dare the central bank do these things? Like, you realize that there's like two options. There was mass unemployment and having our economy coming to a crashing halt, or biting the bullet and letting inflation go up, right? Those were our two fucking options here, right? So if you want to say, hey, we shouldn't have done quantitative easing, we shouldn't have printed money, we should have done all that, fine. But then you have to be okay with having lots of people lose their job, potentially people dying, right? Like getting into really hard economic circumstances that you're paying lip service to, and then at the same time saying, oh, well, we shouldn't have done this thing that stopped that from happening on like a mass scale. Like, what the fuck?
Together. Well, as inflation ticks up because of the results of the decisions made by the Central Bank of Canada, the Bank of Canada, well, those people see the buying power of their savings go down. This is a hidden tax, and it's something that we didn't vote for. Didn't pass in the House of Commons. It was a centralized decision made by central bankers at the Bank of Canada, also happened at the European Central Bank, also happened at the Federal Reserve. This is the way that the Western...
Yes, because their job is to control inflation, control unemployment. Holy fuck.
Global order works. We have these centralized organizations that make very, very big decisions that affect me, that affect you, and that affect your children and your children's children down the line. They will. But they would rather us see them as cold professors, mathematicians that are simply doing an equation in the background. This isn't politics that we're doing. We're not choosing winners and losers. You just don't understand it. This is economics. This is monetary policy. This is central bank monetary policy. It's too complex for you, but we're just solving an equation. Everyone would come to the same solution that we are, so we're just doing what needs to be done, and it is the way that it needs to be done. When in reality, there are different ways of doing things. There are different ways to handle our monetary policy, but central banks would have you believe that they're just doing what the economy is telling them.
Yes, there's the way that you just give it to whoever you voted in, and hey, populist who thinks that printing shit tons of money is good. Oh, good. We just crashed our entire fucking economy. You really want decentralization of those powers. It is incredibly important. Don't let this guy sell you on that bullshit. Like, I can't stress to you how terrible that is for our country if we were to apply what he actually wants. He's being a little coy here. He hasn't said that explicitly. He said it in other videos, so.
To do based on their numbers, based on their calculations. They're not mathematicians. These are a class of politicians. A class of politicians that aren't elected by me or you. Who chooses them? Well, that's another topic for another day. But the idea that we have to trust these centralized institutions is what I'm really getting at here.
And there he sows the seeds of like, see, it's a conspiracy. See, if you just think of it like, you know, you don't know, right? This unknown. So therefore I can put in, I can apply any idea that I want. So I think Destiny put it really, really well, where it was, you know, when math was like an abacus, right? You could tell what it was. So an abacus is just abacus. An abacus is just this. So it's you can see how the math is working because you can count the little tiles, right? And then we got a bit more advanced, and now it's a calculator, and then now it's a smartphone, and now it's these huge amount of complicated systems working together in the background. And it is a level of, hey, trust me, bro, because you, in some degree, have to. Some of these systems get so complicated and so difficult to understand that it does take a PhD to understand quantum mechanics or insert whatever extreme technical thing that exists, right? And yeah, you have to trust in experts. You don't have a choice, the same way that I trust in welders and bricklayers and framers and engineers and all of these things, right? But hey, our monetary policy is weird and scary, therefore it's wrong, while he's here like propping up fucking Ponzi scheme crypto bullshit. Like, fuck off.
How disconnected that feels based on what we've seen over the previous years. We look at our national security institutions, other things that have been questioned as of late. An environment has been created over the past couple of years where nobody knows what's true. Nobody will ever know what's true because of national security laws. We saw this Chinese interference scandal happen a year and a half ago and continue through the commissions that we saw. So much noise.
Look, again, I'm not denying that these scandals happen and that they're bad. What I'm saying is, if you honestly believe that our institutions are fucked, then our job needs to be to fix them, not to just burn the whole fucking system down, right? This scandal that he's talking about, CSIS had been banging this alarm this whole time. So, you know, you don't like decentralization of our banking system because whatever reasons that he's not expanding on. I think it's mostly because he doesn't like that bureaucrats and the expert systems. He falls under the anti-institution kind of bias spectrum. But then you have you have CSIS, which is controlled under the federal government, and they're sounding this alarm, but they can only do so much given what their powers are. So would you prefer to decentralize CSIS so that they can do these investigations away from our government institutions and they can probe into politicians? They can make sure all of these things are running well. Like, do you know how much of a hypocrite he would have to be to say, no, this is okay, but this other part I don't agree with, because somehow I do trust the politicians, but only the politicians that I vote for, because then if they're in charge of the monetary policy, that's really good. But I don't like these unelected bureaucrats who have been running our monetary system, which has actually been working pretty well, all things considered. But housing is bad, but that's because of right, like it's this like fucking annoying double think where I can sit here and be like, hey, I trust our banking institutions. I think it's going pretty well. I think it works quite well. They did a good job of soft landing us into after COVID, right? Could they have done things better? Potentially. Could we have made better changes? Potentially. But I think overall we did a pretty good job of handling those problems, and the counterfactual could have been so much worse. And then to my point, then I could say, oh, we could separate out CSIS and have them be a lot more of an autonomous system that can probe into the federal government and figure out these things, right? We can repair these institutions if you think that they're bad. We don't need to fucking burn them down.
Is that you can't tell what is true. And when there are any facts that would lead you to believe something is true, the Canadian public cannot know it because it would hurt our national security interests. Would it actually hurt our national security interests, or is this just a convenient way of hiding some inconvenient things? The same goes for whatever national security.
Some things are, right? Some things you are national security, and the public shouldn't be privy to them, like straight out. And there does need to be some level of checks and balances on that. But again, the solution would be CSIS, and then leave that up to the control of, hey, unelected bureaucrats who control CSIS.
Allegations there are in the Conservative Party, right? We certainly know that there has been interference in the Conservative Party. To what extent? We don't know. It's a national security issue. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. I am as the all-powerful, right? This is the message that we're getting. And I have a hard time knowing what's true as a result. And it seems like there's been this intentional creation of this environment where we're not able to really understand what's happening in the world. But at the same time, they're saying you've got to trust these institutions. Now, do you really believe that trust in institutions, that leads to a better Canada? Sure, maybe a more cohesive Canada, maybe a more easy to govern Canada, maybe a more profitable Canada for some people. Sure, I'll give you that.
Yes, it leads to a much better Canada by like every conceivable metric. I don't know how much more I need to bang this drum, but yes, having trust in our institutions, in the systems that continue to work to keep us safe, to do all of these things are really important, because trust in institutions allows us to have more social trust and social cohesion, which is good. And he's pointing to like, oh, the rich are getting richer. Again, Canadians as a whole are getting richer, at least as a function of their wages. The issue is housing, and that I'm going to address in another video, but that is a municipal issue. That is one where we as Canadians have said, hey, we would rather our house be a vehicle for investment, you know, a house being something that doesn't produce anything, doesn't provide any goods, doesn't do any of the things that you would want for any other investment you would make, right? It is the number one commodity in our economic prosperity in Canada is rent and mortgages, right? There's a big problem there. And that was created by us Canadians at the end of the day, saying, yeah, we want this. We want it to be an investment vehicle. So.
But is this trust in institutions really serving the average Canadian, the person who is most suffering right now, people living paycheck to paycheck? I'm less and less convinced, and I think that the questioning of these institutions is more and more warranted. Now, I want to keep going here because there's more drama that has actually gone on as it relates to this Trudeau resignation, because this all started about 3 weeks ago. You might have been on the live stream when Chrystia Freeland resigned. She quit ahead of Prime Minister Trudeau firing her as the minister responsible for the economy, the finance minister. Here's a rundown, and I'll show you this clip. I think you're going to find it interesting. Here's the rundown of what happened 3 weeks ago. Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister and the chief economic position as finance minister, she's about to give the fall economic statement, one of the 2 times a year that the government tells us this is where we're headed financially. She's about to give this speech in this large document, but apparently the night before she was about to give this speech, Trudeau had a FaceTime with her, or a Zoom meeting, not in person, I remember hearing, and says, you know what, Chrystia, you're going to give this presentation, but I'm also firing you. That's right. You'll give this presentation. You'll take some of the heat for it, but I'm firing you, and I'm bringing in somebody else, somebody who is already my economic advisor as it stands right now. We're going to bring him in and make him finance minister, or at least take on this file, and that is Mark Carney. You might be familiar with that name. He was a former central banker in Canada, former governor of the Central Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of Canada, same role that Tiff Macklin has. He was a central banker there.
Yep, I fucking love Carney. He's great. He has like a PhD from Oxford in economics. He was actually appointed by Stephen Harper, the conservative prime minister before Trudeau, to the position that Russell's talking about here. And then he also was at the Bank of England.
And then he wasn't for a while, and then he got hired to be the central banker for the Bank of England, I believe. I don't believe it was the European Central Bank that he was the head of, but maybe the Bank of England. Correct me if I'm wrong there. A central banker through and through, and somebody trusted by the global financial community. That's a good thing in some people's eyes and not a great thing in other people's eyes. But Freeland said, I'm not.
Yes, it's a good thing in people who trust and believe in institutions, and a bad thing if you're anti-institution, because he is very run-of-the-mill, stay the course, like globalization is good, WEF is good, IMF, like all these things that these conspiracy theorists freak out about. Yeah, Carney's awesome. He's just like straight down the middle of the road. Like maybe we'll see some of his interviews, but they're fucking awesome. Like I was watching some of the interviews that a bunch of conservatives were freaking out about, and I was like, man, this is sweet. Like Carney's super dope. So I'm a big Carney supporter.
Be embarrassed like that. I'm going to step down. I'm not going to read your speech. I'm not going to read this budget. I'm going to step down and say, I no longer have confidence in you. This is what she did as a surprise to Trudeau. Now, it led to the budget being delayed, coming out hours later. It also led to the presumptive next finance minister saying, I don't want this heat. I don't want this noise. And Mark Carney saying no. Here's a question that was just asked of Trudeau today about Freeland and this relationship that they have and how that has changed. We're going to get into some speculation because I think that something else could have happened here. Something else could have happened. A little bit speculative, a little bit tinfoil hatty, but I find it interesting. Why don't you have a listen to this? Not this. Come on. Low tech studio. Yes, figure it out, Russ. Figure it out. I can't even see. Here's the clip. Let's go.
Prime Minister, up until 3 weeks ago, you were intending to stay, and it seems that the event 3 weeks ago of Ms. Freeland coming out and saying you were firing her as your finance minister was the catalyst that brought us here today. So can you explain your side of what happened there?
Oh, man. That's a fucking loaded question. That's so funny. I have no love for Trudeau, so I really don't care. And I don't disagree that like a lot of this is politically motivated, but man, that's a funny ass question.
Chrystia has been by my side for close to 10 years now. She has been an incredible political partner through just about everything we have done as a government and as a party over the past decade. I'd really hoped that she would agree to continue as my deputy prime minister and take on one of the most important files that not just this government but this country is facing, but she chose otherwise. In regards to what actually happened, I am not someone who's in the habit of sharing private conversations.
Okay, so.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, it was like a demotion. So she was going to go from the finance minister to something else, I believe. So it wasn't exactly a firing, but it was like I forgot what it's called. It's like the room, or not exactly, but like the rooms in Japan where like, oh, we can't fire you, but we're just going to make you stay in a room for 8 hours and do random shit. That's kind of the way that I thought of it.
There's Trudeau's explanation of what happened. I think from his perspective, he was thinking, like, we're gonna go through each person's perspective: Trudeau's perspective, Freeland's perspective, Carney's perspective, and then one that gets a little bit tinfoil hatty, but one that I think is more likely than not. And I'm not hearing anybody say it.
Oh God. I just we'll see what his tinfoil hat bullshit is. Fuck.
I think Trudeau thinks the economy is our worst thing that we have right now in terms of how liberals are looking. I need to distance myself from economic policy. I need to get rid of this finance minister, do a cabinet shuffle, bring in someone respectable, someone like Mark Carney, someone that many liberals are saying will be the savior of the party, may even be the next leader of the party. And depending on how things go, we'll talk about that in a moment. I got some concerns, let me tell you. Let's bring in Mark Carney, fresh face, new policies, will improve in the polls. I'll stay on as leader. We'll win the next election. I don't know if he was actually thinking that. That seems a little far-fetched given what the polling was. Maybe we'll do better. We won't lose our official party status. Maybe that's the new goal. Maybe that's the new bar that's being set. And things will be good. Freeland will step down. She'll still have an important file. She'll be the one that negotiates with Trump about the next USMCA deal. Well, that's what I assume he's referring to. One of the most important things we're facing as Canadians is the threat of tariffs. But she says no.
I mean, the threat of tariffs is like a pretty big thing. I wouldn't just like brush that under the rug. That's pretty big deal of like, what is it, 25% tariffs on literally everything because Trudeau or fucking Trump doesn't understand how tariffs or trade work, but whatever.
She says no, and she kind of tears down Trudeau. She's the reason that Trudeau has resigned today. This is what has happened. That's her from her perspective. She's not going to take the fall for him. Maybe he's trying to distance herself as well to try to maybe take his role. Well, could she win a leadership race? I tend to think no. I think that she's too tied to Trudeau and his policies, but you never know. Crazy things have happened.
I think with Freeland, the thing is she's more popular than Trudeau. We all know that. I don't think anybody's under the illusion that the Liberals will win the election per se. I think what they're hoping for is not getting blown out. The other thing is, if they can scrape enough votes to just make it another minority government, then they've like the Conservatives have to outright win a majority. If they don't win a majority, then it's a left-wing party essentially, because the NDP, the Liberals, and even the Bloc is a little weird, the Bloc Québécois, but will form some level of agreement, and the Conservatives will kind of be pushed out. So the Conservatives have to win a majority. The Liberals can scrape by with a minority.
World. Now, from Mark Carney's perspective, I think that there's two ways of looking at this. The first one is the official story. Carney said to Trudeau, yes, I'll take this position. Trudeau tries to execute the move to have Freeland vacate that position so that he could take it. Freeland says no, screws the whole plan up. Mark Carney gets spooked. Trudeau has to put in Dominic LeBlanc in this role. That's the traditional story right now. Carney had already said yes, but Freeland, because she made so much noise, was like sort of sinking the Liberal ship. And Carney's like, I don't want to be a part of that right now. Peace out. You're screwed. Get your old babysitter instead, which is what he did in Dominic LeBlanc. Now, there is a third perspective here. There's a third idea that could have some merit when you think about people's interests.
Oh, no.
Was there any kind of communication or connection between Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney? Did they agree that maybe Trudeau wouldn't be best suited to lead the Liberal Party into the next election? Did each of them think, well, maybe I would be a better Liberal leader and possible next Prime Minister? Mark Carney and Freeland both. It's both in their interest, if they have political leadership aspirations, to have Trudeau not run in this next election and possibly win their own leadership race to take his role. This has been framed as Freeland being a rogue agent and Carney just getting spooked. Could they have been working in concert here? Could Trudeau have said, I'm going to fire Freeland, Carney, you're going to come in as
This is what pisses me off with these like these anti-institution people. They trust so much in their own personal intuition of like, yeah, my random opinion about what could happen that I have absolutely no proof of, that I won't ever be able to prove, but tinfoil hat isn't this interesting, and it's so fucking boring to me and stupid. Like, again, I won't say there's a 0% chance, but there's I wish people would put probabilities to these things of like, what probability do you think this is true? Like, is this worth discussing? Do you think it's any more than 0.5% or 1%? Like, my issue with framing things like this is if like, here's a theory, or here's a hypothesis, and here's a hypothesis. And our dumb ape brains go, oh yeah, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. When really it's like, okay, the main headline story, probably pretty accurate, makes a fair bit of sense, is like, yeah, Chrystia Freeland has been getting a lot of shit. There's been talks for months about Trudeau stepping down. She's getting shafted. And yeah, it's reasonable for her to go, yeah, get fucked. And it's also reasonable for Carney to be like, hey, if I want to be Prime Minister, and I want Carney to be Prime Minister and run for the Liberal Party, he's my choice. But we also know that it's like super tainted, any position that, like the Liberal Party is super tainted. I don't think that they're going to pull off the minority government like I was talking about earlier. So why would Carney want to be the Prime Minister now? Wouldn't it be better to have your party do whatever it does, let Christina Freeland take the prime ministership and take the big L, and then if the conservatives fuck up in whatever way or not, you at least have now 4 years to build Carney up into your next prime minister, right? Like, I don't know, like this theory is already falling apart to me, but
perfect. And then Carney, being the political operator that he seems to be, says, okay, I'll take that job, passes some information along to Freeland, allows her to think about it, and says, hey, if you bring down this ship, we can screw this guy, and we can both benefit from that. Now, will we ever see any kind of evidence or proof of this communication? No. Maybe we will. Who knows? You never know what'll come out.
How do they both benefit?
People have and what they would do, or what you would do if you were in their shoes, even if it is quite callous. It makes you wonder, were they working together to bring down this leader? And if they were, why didn't they do it sooner?
Again, just like, oh, I don't have trust in institutions, so whatever dumbass opinion you have just like filters through. Again, like, I'm not a political scientist, and neither is he, and it, like, I don't care. Dude, like,
maybe it's as soon as Freeland has it become clear that she's not going to be able to serve her own interests going forward with this government, then it becomes possible for Carney to say, let's just take this guy down. Other tinfoil hat stuff says, I don't even know why Trudeau went on for so long with the polling so bad, so much so that it makes me think, is he really the one in control of his own decisions about his life and his roles, or are there other people that have other interests? And
what? But again, he's not even making sense here. Like the Liberal Party, from what I remember, doesn't have a mechanism to get rid of the party leader. So if we just assume that Trudeau has some level of vanity and some level of, I'm, holier than thou, or I'm really important, or anything to that degree, it's pretty easy to see that he would just stay in power because he thinks he's great, or he thinks that things are going to turn around, or anything like this. And it took months and months and months of his party and different caucuses and different people, and then finally Christina Freeland being like, okay, up yours, I've been with you for 10 years, but get fucked, from to finally step down.
Other ways of convincing the prime minister to act in a certain way. Could that be a national foreign interest? Could that just be corporate interests? I don't know. These are the things I'm asking. So a messy breakup when it comes to
this. Just I'm just asking questions, man. I'm just asking questions.
Freeland and Trudeau, will they ever make up? I don't know. I don't think so. I think they'll be what is that word? I can't even think of it. I think that they'll be respectable to each other, and they will say, "I wish them all the best." But behind closed doors, I think you likely get a different answer on exactly how they feel about all of that. I think so. So Parliament is prorogued. We've got to pause here until March 24th. There's going to be a Liberal leadership race. Who are the options? Now, I don't blame the Liberals for shutting down Parliament, for pausing government. It happened before with them, but I think that any political party would use whatever tools and even stretch whatever tools they have legally to serve their interests, which is certainly what's happening here. The Liberal Party is in shambles. They don't have a true leader, and if there were an election today, well, they'd be even more screwed than they likely already are regardless. Political parties will do this kind of meddling to serve their own interests. Conservatives would do it. The NDP would do it. We've seen them do it. No real qualms there when you look at it from a realistic perspective. What's interesting to me is who's going to be the next Liberal leader. I say this all the time, and a lot of you disagree with me. I've heard a lot of you say this is something that I don't see eye to eye with you, Russ. I am cheering with all my heart's content for the Liberals to be as strong as they possibly can as a political party. I'm cheering for the Bloc Québécois, the NDP. I'm cheering for the Conservatives. I'm cheering for the People's Party of Canada. I want all these parties to do their absolute best to come up with platforms, come up with ideas that will convince Canadians to vote for them. More competition in any respect results in better outcomes for the consumer, right? In this case, it's me and you, people who are voting, people who are living here in Canada. When more parties are strong and when there are more better options, I think.
Yeah, sure. It's just the division of power in Canada is a little bit different than the States. Like, our provinces have a lot of power, and like provinces have control over their natural resources and stuff like that, and that's and healthcare. Well, healthcare is a bit split between the two. It's like provinces have control over their healthcare, but they get funding from the federal government and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of meddling in there, but people put way too much stock in what our federal government does and not nearly enough in what our municipal and provincial politics do. And it's really frustrating to even to have the right, whatever platform they run on probably isn't going to nominally affect your life, right? Whether it's Liberal or Conservative or even NDP, the actual impacts that they have are relatively low on your day-to-day life. And we see this even more in the States, where it doesn't really matter whether it's Democrat or Republican. Stock market keeps going up, real wages keep going up. All of these things keep kind of trucking along because it's more about what the individuals in these places do and the things that they create, right? Like, obviously you can have really messed up things, for instance, giving central banking to whatever populist party gets into power, and then they just choose to print a shit ton of money and it fucks up your whole economy, right? But given our strong institutions in this nation and the checks and balances that exist, it's hard for things to get truly, truly fucked up. People want to constantly blame Trudeau. People will constantly blame Polyev when things are bad. I think there's a good image that showed that Trump, it's how well people think the economy are doing based off of who's in power. So how well economy is based on who's in power, USA. And it's just like, yeah, I think it's this one. Where it's like, how strong is the economy? It really depends on your politics. So it's just like, the economy is fucking great, and then Biden's inaugurated, and then it's just like, clearly the economy is shit, and then Biden gets inaugurated, and it's like, the economy is good again. Like it's just it's so silly to me. And I've seen charts that go further than this, but like the economy will be fine under a conservative or a liberal politician. Our human rights, our human welfare and indices like that, like the what's it called? It's like augmented human index or human development index. So if you look at this, right, and you look at Canada, where are we? Yeah, human development index. So these indices look at like inequality, gender development, things like that. You can like, how healthy are you? What's your schooling? What's your standard of living? All of these things, right? And if we just look at it as a chart, and if we, one sec, it should, a line chart. So you can look at how they've changed over time, right? So we'll just look at like Canada, right? Canada, right? Line keeps just going up, right? 70s, 80s, 90s, right? Like fucking this was like when the conservatives were in power. It still went up a little bit, goes up when the liberals are in power. It's just like a nice straight line of human development, economic prosperity, all these things, all these lines keep going up. I know things are tough and things are hard, and it's largely driven by really poor housing policy, and because housing, kind of the land, labor, capital thing, so housing falls under the land piece more or less, is really expensive. That screws up a bunch of other metrics. But if we can deal with our housing crisis, Canada is actually in a pretty good place to be prosperous. And that's why a lot of my future content is going to be around housing and how to fix the housing crisis.
Ultimately, you get the best case scenario, right? So I want the Liberals to be strong, just like I want every other party to be strong, just like I want the Conservatives to be strong. I hope for a strong party, but in my eyes, none of the clear options fit the ticket for this Liberal leadership. We've got Freeland. I think is too associated with Trudeau. I think many people will associate her too heavily with Trudeau. I don't think that her letter disowning the Prime Minister will be enough to disassociate her, even if she was the reason that Trudeau stepped down.
Actually, I'm curious, what's the Freeland popularity? I remember seeing... No, well, that's what she looks like. Popularity versus Trudeau polling. Yeah, this is just the poll. Yeah, you can see the fucking liberals falling off a cliff after COVID here. But yeah, I think it's this one, or these types of things. So it's like, what's the popularity of the different leaders, and Trudeau is way below a bunch of others. Oh, it doesn't even have Trudeau on here anymore, which makes sense because he stepped down. But there was older surveys that looked at it, but they probably aren't going to come up much anymore. But anyway, I remember seeing surveys where he was at like 12% and she was at like 25% or something like that. So she's much more popular, but the bar wasn't high.
I don't think that that's quite enough to distance herself from a population that has largely decided we don't like what's happened over the past 9 years. We want something else. I think she's too associated with the old guard, the people who have been here. Now, Mark Carney could very well win the liberal leadership race. But again, if you're new to the channel, subscribe. You might not know this about me. I have a certain worldview that's developed as I've followed politics, as I've studied this over the past number of years, making videos
As
on it.
he has
I don't think that the
understood
ultimate power
very
in the
little.
world is centralized in a given government or a specific leader. I think that there are issues with global organizations that
here
make
we
decisions
go.
that other countries are
Here we
beholden to without being in elected positions. We know all humans are corruptible, and I think that the more and more power that is centralized into global organizations, and the more and more sway that they have over countries and over the actions of different institutions in those countries, well, the more susceptible.
Again, this is just the like planting seeds of like, see, there could be shady people in the works. It's the Illuminati, it's the IMF, it's the WEF, right? Like we look at these institutions and we go, okay, like what are they doing? Hey, the IMF, they're trying to help these nations, and they tell these nations to hold to certain standards and create certain banking systems and develop these institutions, because one of the worst, if you've ever read, where the fuck is the book? The Poor Economics book, right? The worst thing that can happen to countries is having weak institutions. So one of the things that the IMF is trying to do is develop strong institutions like we have in the West that has brought us so much economic prosperity and life and liberty and happiness and all of these things. And so they give out loans to these countries so that they can build an infrastructure, but they also have some strings attached of well, one, they're only going to invest in kind of high ROI or high probability of succeeding things, unlike the Belt and Road Initiative that China does, where they just indenture these nations by being like, yeah, we'll give you money for this thing that will definitely fail. And then when it fails and doesn't make any money, then you owe us and we're going to build a military base in your country or whatever. Right? Versus like the IMF is actually trying to help these nations. They're actually trying to invest and build these countries up. Fuck. Just gonna sit here and be a giant globalist shill.
It is to centralized takeover, centralized control, to serve the interests of somebody other than the actual citizens of the country. That's the world I think we live in today, with these global organizations of central banks, Bank of International Settlements.
What do you mean not serving the interests? Like, again, like all you have to do is like look at human development or look at real wages in these countries, or look at any of these things and be like, hey, quality of life is pretty good. Hey, the like value of their dollar. Hey, what's their purchasing power? Hey, do they have more stuff than they had in the 90s? Or like the best time in the world to live is today, right? Like we romanticize the past, and then our monkey brains are prone to looking at danger and looking at the worst things, and the fact that the worst things in our life are way smaller and way less impactful than they have been in the past is like a testament to the strength of our institutions and the strength that our like world has created by working together and being invested in each other. Again, it's not this shadowy cabal of people trying to like control the world. They've made humongous steps in improving the quality of life and the lives of generations of people. Fuck.
IMF, we have these bankers that get together and they decide, hey, we're in a safe space. Let's talk about how we can handle this in each of our economies, which seems reasonable. Learn from each other as a global organization of people who are in similar roles in different countries. Yes, that makes sense in principle. But when you have these people coming together making decisions about the way that they're going to operate, and they're not elected, and they're not required to give you any information about what they're doing, I think that's a problem. And that's what I try to elaborate on in much of the videos on this channel, and make clear to people how much power and how many decisions are being made outside of the realm of what they would want you to believe is politics. These precise mathematician costumes that they're wearing, it's not true. These are people who are choosing winners in the economy, choosing losers in the economy, choosing winners in the world.
Sure. Like, again, this is all like unfalsifiable. It's just like, yeah, this, again, sneaky cabal of, the IMF and the WEF have basically become the Illuminati for these types of conspiracy theorists, anti-institution people. I was like trying to give this guy a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt. I've seen some of his videos and they were a little conspiratorial, but like now seeing this like shit, it's like full off the rails. Like, again, just if I plant enough doubt in your mind, now you kind of you can fill that doubt with whatever preconception you have, versus like, hey, what are these institutions actually doing? How much power do they actually have? Just because he's going to bring it up, but Carney's part of the World Economic Forum, and I guarantee you he's going to bring it up.
Losers in the world and are impacting your ability to get ahead as a person. And I think that there's not much more politically important than those topics. The reason I bring this up is that there is no leader that is talking like that, really. no feasible leader for the next election. Carney is the personification of these concerns. We've got somebody who has got lots of connections in this global financial community, jumping from consultant job to investment firm to central banker here, central banker there. Clearly, this is somebody that has trust of that global community. Could that be used to help Canada? He'll certainly make the case that it is. My connections will help us lead us to a strong economy. I'm sure will be something else.
Yes, right. Our number one issue is housing and lack of productivity and lack of investment. So getting somebody who knows these systems and knows how to bring investment into our country is probably really fucking good. And having somebody who understands the political systems, how to get things done, how world economic systems work, how global trade works, how globalization, all of these benefits that we have gotten from this interconnected world. Yes, it's really good to have intelligent, smart people in positions of power. Holy fuck.
Say if he runs that for leadership. But it doesn't do anything to alleviate my concerns about having more and more big decisions being made by fewer and fewer people behind more and more closed doors. Now we've got people like Dominic LeBlanc, Mark Miller, Champagne, these liberal people who have been around for quite some time who may have leadership aspirations. I just don't think you can separate it far enough from Trudeau to get people to vote for them. Can you credibly make new policy ideas that will resonate with Canadians without simultaneously getting accused of, well, while you were in power for 9 years, how come you didn't bring this up at the time? Did you always not agree with Trudeau? Or are you just saying this now to try to get votes from other people to win this leadership race? I think that a lot of the people associated with this government over the past while, they're not going to be solid options. But at the same time, I don't think that Pierre Poilievre talks about this in the right way either. He talks about how money printing is an issue. He's talked about central banking. In 2021, he talked a lot about this as well, has kind of slowed down his rhetoric on it as of late. But he doesn't talk about how we could get out of this situation where there's more people making decisions behind the scenes that are impacting everyday Canadians. He says money printing bad, it was Justin Trudeau's fault. It was their liberal spending that caused us to print money. I believe more so that it was a belief that trust in the major Western institutions and trust in them operating how they are operating, that is what really led to the money printing in my eyes.
Again, it's a trade-off. Unemployment or inflation, dude. Pick your poison.
We saw central banks around the world print billions and billions of dollars per week all throughout the pandemic to prop up the economy. That might have been a good thing. That might have kept workers and employees connected to their jobs so that we didn't have as high unemployment numbers. Could have propped up the economy, but we also saw the downside of it. We saw the upside for some people: asset price inflation, real estate going through the roof, crypto going through the roof, stocks. When you add more money to the system, the things that are measured in that money go up because each individual dollar is worth less, right?
Yeah, and they gave money to people. What the fuck? They were giving like $2,000 every I don't remember, what was it, every couple of months to people. Like, yeah, they were very much trying to like keep the economy running. And yeah, we're gonna have to bite the bullet on inflation because we printed a bunch of money. But hey, probably better than the alternative.
I don't think that this was all because of Trudeau's spending when it comes to the CERB and CRB and the emergency wage subsidies. I don't think that this certainly is connected to it, but I do believe that our connection to this organization of central banks globally led us down this path of zero interest rate monetary policy, a quantitative easing, money made for these big banks as they trade settlement balances to own more government of Canada bonds. These are details we talked about on the channel before. Nobody's talking about it at that level, Poilievre either. Although we do have some information about what Poilievre thinks. This is something that's been talked about ad nauseum over the past 4 days. I haven't given my take on it yet. We've got a 2-hour interview between Jordan Peterson and Pierre Poilievre. Some good points made.
This is something that I haven't watched yet, but if you guys like this type of video, I'd be happy to do one for the Poilievre video.
In there, some not so good points made. But the way that he talks about money printing, he doesn't give any kind of, here's what I would have done in this situation. Here's how I could have led us better than Trudeau could have. Here's how I'm going to push back against the interests of these global organizations to actually serve the interests of us here at home, nationally, as Canadians. Let's listen to this clip from the interview here. I think you're going to find it interesting. I sure did, but I do have some problems with it.
Okay, so what would you do to stop inflation?
Well, we stop the money printing. We need, and the money printing is just a means to fund deficit spending. Governments borrow.
Define the deficit, yeah, for people.
So basically, the deficit is the.
So I think that this is an over.
Yes, it's to fund deficit spending, sort of. It's like literally you get taxes that come in. If you spend more than those taxes, then you need to print money effectively to pay for those things, right? The thing is, those things are services. Those things are healthcare. Those things are, in the States, Medicaid and Medicare and social insurance and all of those things, right? And the issue is that you can ask people, hey, should we try to slow down inflation, or should we try to like stop money printing? And they'll be like, yeah. And then you're like, okay, what services are you willing to cut? And the answer is, oh, fuck no, right? It happens with like a number of things. So you can ask the same question of like, hey, do you want more kids? And women will be like, oh yeah, I'm not having as many kids as I want. And then, and men. And then you go, okay, like, kids cost this amount of money. Are you like willing to give up that amount of money essentially to have kids? And then it turns off a cliff, right? And people are like, oh, well, maybe not, right? So people might pay lip service to, yeah, I want this thing, right? It's like, oh, do you want better healthcare? And everybody is going to go, yeah, I'd love better healthcare. It's like, are you willing to pay for better healthcare? No. And so there's always a disconnect between what people want and what people are willing to pay for. And so the issue that conservatives always run into is, hey, we're going to cut services, but we're not going to cut spending. And then you run into the same fucking problem. And then on the liberal side, you're like, we're going to keep everything the same, but then we're going to increase the spending. Like, really what needs to happen is, if you're a conservative, an honest conservative, you need to be like, hey, we're going to cut spending and we're going to cut services. Well, that's gonna be really unpopular. You're not going to get voted. So we can just like pull that under the rug by printing more money, or we can increase the services, but we should increase taxes. Hey, that's going to piss people off. You're not going to get elected. So I guess we'll just push that under the rug and print more money, right? As long as we keep inflation under control, who gives a fuck? Right? And that's kind of the way that we've decided as a society that we're willing to do that, because people don't understand these institutions, but they see these like pocketbook issues of like, if you tax me more, I'm not going to see that direct result. And it's really hard to quantify 1 or 2 or 3% improvements in your quality of life because you're paying more in taxes. It's really hard to draw those direct distinctions. Humans are really, really bad with delayed payoff systems. We're really, really good with direct payoff systems. So again, in the Poor Economics book, one of the best ways that they were able to get people to be vaccinated with measles was literally giving them a bag of rice. And they were like, what the fuck? Like, this bag of rice or bag of beans or whatever. And they were like, why is this working? And it was because it was a instant gratification. It's like, I get a thing for vaccinating, not something that's like a delayed gratification, or something where it's like, I vaccinated my kid and then they still got sick because they didn't understand that it was vaccinating against a specific disease, not against all disease and things like that. There's a whole bunch of really good stuff in Poor Economics, but I'm going on a bit of a tangent.
Simplification of why we printed money during the pandemic and for America during the Great Financial Crisis. I don't think money was only printed for because governments wanted money to take on debt to provide these social programs. Also, when you print money, you increase demand in the bond market. That certainly allows the government to take on more debt. But what you're doing is stimulating the economy. You're bringing down interest rates, and that allows more businesses to expand more quickly. It allows for consumers to feel better about their finances and go out and spend and take on cheap debt. Well, everybody did that in Canada.
Yeah, it's great.
Because they made you feel like, hey, if you're not doing this, you're the schmuck, right? Because we're going to inflate away everybody's debt. I don't think that it's all just because the government wants money to implement social programs. I also think that the central bankers were like, hey, we need to stimulate the economy here. We've got to close down the economy. This was their idea, so we need to stimulate it. We can't just allow a recession to happen. When I think that there's arguments to be made that, one, the economy shouldn't have been shut down to the extent that it was. That could have helped us. And two, just this thought that we cannot let anything negative happen to the economy. We cannot allow these big banks to experience any kind of stress. We cannot let people who have taken on too much debt and are losing their jobs, we can't let them lose their homes. It would look too bad on us. I think that there's an argument to be made that more of a free market with less intervention from the central banks may have led to better outcomes for Canadians, because we wouldn't have seen asset price inflation, all these social issues popping up in terms of housing. And
again, the housing issue is municipal. They're like, and having people's entire life savings and all these things wiped off the board probably is going to cause a lot more strife. You're definitely going to get a rise in populism. You're going to get a rise in all of these things because those pocketbook issues are really, really bad. I think we did the best thing that we could given the circumstances. Yeah, you get punched in the face with inflation, and Biden probably lost the election because of it, but it's much better than the alternative.
People not being able to start families. I think a lot of this is the result of the decisions made by central banks, not necessarily the individual governments who kind of were along for the ride when it comes to this global money printing that we saw.
Difference between what
This guy literally doesn't know anything about housing markets. Holy fuck.
it spends and what it brings in.
It's usually calculated on a yearly basis.
That's right.
Yep. And the debt?
Well, the debt is just the accumulation of the deficits.
Right.
So the deficit right now is $62 billion. And
I thought it had a ceiling of
41 billion. Yeah, right.
Doesn't that have a ceiling?
Yeah.
It's not, eh?
I guess not. Look, there are very real present day consequences for that. Deficits increase the money supply. Central banks effectively facilitate that increase in the money supply, and that causes inflation. And it's why I have a buddy whose family moved here from Italy back in 1973. His father worked paving roads.
Even our inflation is like under control now. Inflation, Canada. It's back down to fucking like 1.9, like 2%. This is the target for inflation, right? I don't know, dog. This is obviously during COVID, right? So pandemic, inflation rises. That's bad. We're trying to bring it back down to 2%. Hey, look, the central banks have done their job and brought inflation down to 2%. Fuck, dude.
And his mother made sandwiches in a senior's home. They were able to pay off their home 10 minutes from Parliament Hill in 7 years.
Right.
Their grandchildren wouldn't be able to save up a down payment for that home in 15 years, and they will be university educated with all the advantages of having been here 2 decades. That is the consequence
policy.
of the money supply growing vastly quicker than the stuff that money buys. So we have to do is
He's right about that, right? Just the inflation that we see from the result of printing of money to stimulate the economy. What we're not hearing is that decision is largely out of the politicians' hands, I believe. I think that central bankers and global financial organizations have made it almost a religious dogma that monetary policy...
Like, that's why, fuck, dude. I'm gonna actually lose my mind. So, Unhinged, National Post, right? Hey, you know what's fucking sweet about real wages is that they include CPI, the inflation rate, right? So this is adjusted for inflation, which means we've gotten richer adjusted for inflation for a basket of goods. One of the reasons that CPI doesn't include this, well, it includes housing, but it doesn't kind of account for like the humongous rise in housing costs is because it's like a 25-year lag average, because you're looking at like the average housing cost for people. So like if you bought your house 25 years ago for $400,000, you're not paying $400,000 like on the $400,000 mortgage anymore, right? So CPI is normalized for the average person. But again, our monetary policy seems to be working just fine. It's inflation, like we can look at inflation over time, where like this is the 80s when it was really bad, but like if we look at like since 2000, what is it, like mostly 2 to 3%, few spikes at 4%, 2%, right? Until we get up to here during COVID, right? So this is all like reasonable inflation down here while this was fucking happening. You can't blame the money supply for the housing price increase. Again, it's fucking zoning. It like every economist who's done anything on this knows it's zoning. I gotta lose my goddamn mind.
Is not political policy. We are separate from you. We are not beholden to the public. We will make this decision on how we're going to manage the economy. We will choose the winners. We will choose the losers, and you're going to operate within our framework.
It's not choosing winners and losers. Their job is to like control inflation and control unemployment, and then print money because like, what are you talking about?
stop growing the money supply and start growing the stuff money buys, right? Produce more energy, grow more food, build more homes. We have to unleash the free enterprise system to produce more stuff of value. And this is where we have to remove the artificial scarcity that the government is imposing on the population. Let's incentivize our municipalities to grant the fastest building permits in the world to build homes.
What do you mean? Like, that's what the liberal government is trying to do. They're literally like, hey, municipal governments, we're going to give you money with our housing fund that you're blocking, Pierre. By the way, what is this? Pierre, it's like Pierre Polievary blocks housing fund. It's something like that. Yeah. Conservative MPs frustrated after Polyev bars them from promoting housing fund, right? The thing that he's literally talking about in this video, right? Right? This housing accelerator fund, right? They want to help their citizens and he's stopping it for partisan reasons. Like, fuck me, dude.
You have a plan for that, in principle.
Yes, I mean, I'm going to say the municipal governments, they either speed up permits, cut development charges, and free up land, or they will lose their federal infrastructure money. So they will have a powerful...
You're telling your party to do that? Oh my God.
carrot and stick incentive to speed up home building.
And the percentage of a new house price that's a consequence of
we get into a lot more
regulation.
real estate related stuff here. But all this just to say.
Oh my God. Well, I guess if you want me to lose my goddamn mind watching that video. Ugh.
Although Polyev talks a lot more eloquently about this kind of stuff and talks in a way that doesn't make you believe that he thinks you're an idiot, it doesn't scratch the itch entirely. It just doesn't scratch the itch entirely. It doesn't scratch the itch of what's really behind all of this. How come people aren't able to make decisions about their own economies when it comes to global organization rules, right? The implementation of different rules by the International Monetary Fund, the vast amounts of money that are contributed to the IMF so that they can support different projects in different parts of the world with varying degrees of merit. These contributions that other countries make to them. The Bank of International Settlements saying, here's how you can operate as a bank in the world, and here's how you can't operate. Here's when we're going to change the rules, here's how we're going to change the rules. Hey, central bankers from the European Central Bank, Bank of Canada, Bank of Australia, Bank of New Zealand, Bank of Canada, let's all get together regularly in Basel, how do you say that? This neutral site. And we'll make the decisions about how we'll operate monetary policy. We are the mathematicians that are just simply coming to the conclusion that anyone else would. We are not politicians. We are central bankers. None of this stuff is what is being talked about by Polyev. I hope he does start talking about it.
I don't know what else I can say. Yeah, goddamn experts in their field who have spent decades of their life learning about the best economic and monetary policies are talking about those things and then creating really good economic and monetary policies that are benefiting us Crazy. What a terrible fucking world.
But I just don't have faith that he will at this point. We're going to keep on watching it here on the channel. All this to say, Trudeau steps down. It's a big day. New year, new leader, eventually. Probably certainly new prime minister, probably a new prime minister from a new party within the next 6 months, although it seems like it's going to be delayed quite a lot. And doesn't really seem like it's serving the will of the Canadian people as it stands in the polls right now, but I digress. We see this drama between Freeland, this drama between Trudeau and her. Is Mark Carney involved in the taking down of Trudeau, leading to this leadership race? I'm not sure. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you a dime. Hell, you won't even see me pop up on your feed if you don't watch these videos. Most of us are on the home feed there. It'll only show you me if you want to. All it does is if you appreciate this content, click the subscribe button. It only helps out the channel. Hope for more and more videos just like this one. Some longer form content, but I also make videos that are a little bit more condensed, a little bit more explanatory, giving you examples.
I'm subscribed because it gives me good content to see how like terrible the other side makes their positions. Yeah, I just like most of this is just like conspiracy garbage, right? Like it's hey, like I hate these international systems. I hate these strong institutions that I don't have a say in or I don't understand very well. Again, anybody who is telling you to buy crypto probably doesn't understand economic systems very well. Clearly, he doesn't understand housing markets, and he doesn't seem to understand the benefits that these institutions bring to us. And it's this like, oh, if I just fucking tear everything down, it'll make everything better. And me, random guy on the internet, knows better than, again, all of these experts with all of these institutional knowledges, right? I'm going to sit here and I will simp for big business. I will simp for globalization, and I will simp for strong institutions because they are the bedrock and the foundation of the amazing and incredible society that our world's been able to create. And if we want to bitch and complain about the worst thing in Canada, then bitch and complain to your mayor and your councillors in your city and tell them to build more fucking housing. Because we have a separation of powers in Canada that our federal government is not going to fix our housing crisis. So, fuck. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. This is a bit of a different style of video for me, a little bit more off the cuff, but you can see how easy it is to just fact check people, right? Like it doesn't take very much to see that this guy's talking out of his ass and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Even he clearly knows some things like quantitative easing and how some of these banking systems work, but then he just inserts his own personal biases of like, and therefore it's bad, not, and therefore maybe there's areas I don't understand, maybe there's areas that I misunderstand. And a lot of things are going quite well in that direction. And then he falsely attributes blame to these things to fit his narrative. And he puts it eloquently, but it's all bullshit. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, hope you hang out and listen more. My Discord's always available if you want to come argue or debate with me. And Russell, he's a much bigger channel than me. But if he disagrees with my assessment, I'm always happy to chat. I just wanted to quickly say thank you to anybody who made it this far in the video and listened this long. I know this isn't my standard, more polished type of content, but if this is content that you enjoy, it's content that I can push out a little bit more often. So if you want to hear more from me and more of my takes and more of what I think on a bunch of different subjects, this is probably the easiest way to do it. So let me know in the comments down below if this is something you'd like me to do more of. I know there's a contingent of people who watch me who like to put things on in the background when they work or do other things. So I figured this style of content is a little bit better for that. And then, you know, you get more than maybe 5 to 10 minutes of content from me every week or two. So yeah, just let me know down below. Thanks for listening. And additionally with content like this, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to mess things up. I'm going to maybe not say things as correctly as I would want to. So any corrections like that, I'll put in the description of the video. For instance, like Bitcoin is technically not a Ponzi scheme. It's more of a pyramid scheme. Overall, it's a zero-sum game. It's actually a negative zero-sum game because you have to put physical energy in to make it, and you only make gains when other people lose. You could get me on semantics there for calling it a Ponzi scheme rather than like a pyramid or just a terrible zero-sum investment game. Yeah, so it's things like that where I may make slip-ups.